Carrying all those stakes may give you a splinter. Here's your look at the NECA Toys Universal Monsters Teenage Mutant Ninja Turtles Splinter as Van Helsing. Trouble with monsters? Call the Rat with the Hats. NECA's newest release in its Universal Monsters and Teenage Mutant Ninja Turtles action figure line is Splinter. This continuing line pays tribute to the world's most famous turtles and Universal's icons of horror. Splinter as Van Helsing reimagines the turtles' sensei as their famous vampire hunter and is equipped with tools for taming terrors. This 7-inch scale figure includes crossbow, arrows, quiver, knife, stakes, interchangeable heads, and swappable hands. Now, before this certain sensei starts slaying, I'd like to thank the folks over at NECA Toys that did provide this sample of Splinter as Van Helsing that we could have a look in this review. I'm also going to bring in the turtles in a moment for comparisons of sizes. Obviously, it kind of goes without saying that Splinter will be the smallest of the batch. I'm also going to grab my tape measure, as I always do, just to tell you how tall the figure stands. Now, he does have technically he has two head sculpts. The one that I prefer is the one that has the hat, so I'm going to stick with that for the measurements. Splinter with hat included is about 5.5 inches in height, or the figure is going to be about 14 centimeters tall. And, of course, for comparisons, we have a lot to cover off. Here's what Splinter looks like with the much larger Frankenstein's monster portrayed here by Raphael. In this case, Splinter, I would say, goes only to about the shoulders of Raphael. Here's also what the figure looks like with the recently looked at Leonardo as the Hunchback. And, of course, not to overlook the last turtle, because we have yet to get Donatello, just to move over and free up a little bit of space. The one that's the most closest in size is obviously still taller, but here's what the figure also looks like with Michelangelo as the Mummy. Bringing down the old camera so you guys can see everything that gets packaged along with Splinter. Some pleasant surprises here. One thing I was certainly surprised to see was the figure came included with a display stand. Now, with his wire frame, Splinter stands okay, but if you did want to use yourself a display stand like the capture of Splinter, the set that we looked at a while ago, I might very well use this stand, because of course it's using the same size of feet, same mold of feet as that other Splinter. I could easily then use it. Now, the thing about the display stand is, as you can see with the pegs so close together like this, in order to have Splinter standing properly, you really have to bring the feet really close together to attach them onto those pegs. One thing you can also do, too, is not commit to the idea of displaying him with both feet attached to the peg. Rather, just attach one of them, so at least you could have his feet a little wider apart. Again, with the wire frame in place with Splinter, you really don't technically need this stand. So I'm going to probably find another purpose in my collection to use this for. Can move that out of the way. The figure also comes included with, like I said, a whole lot of weapons. I guess first we'll have a look at it. We'll pick these up. The figure comes included with 3 stakes. I chuckle again at what I said at the beginning of the video. Getting yourself a Splinter, stakes made out of wood. Okay, many of you got the reference. You get actually 3 stakes, which is a bit also surprising. The stakes, if you can hopefully see, look very different from one another, or at least the way they've painted them. One is a little bit, well, I guess these two are a little closer together. This one here has a slightly darker point. Get the point? They are nicely sculpted in the sense that they do look like they're made of wood. Now, when you holster these onto Splinter, first of all, the figure comes included with some series of hands. One of the hands is actually the best for holding the stakes. It's this one that's got the closer grip. You can see he holds the stake perfectly fine that way. If, though, you have other plans for his hands, you can then pick up the figure and then locate here on the front. On the back is his quiver that's going to hold all his arrows, but on the front of his bandolier, you actually see there's holstered sections dedicated for those stakes. Let's go ahead and slide the stakes in. The stakes seem to be a little loose when you are putting them in. Like, the farther you put them down, a little bit thicker at the end is the stake, so it's going to hold a little bit better in the bandolier. So you can holster all 3 of them. And then, interesting thing enough is that there's still 1 extra slot for a stake, and yet you only get 3 stakes. I suppose what you could also then do is the figure comes included with a knife. The knife, as you can see, has a blade that's gunmetal gray. The handle is actually, if I can flip this around, is more of a matte black. Now, you could then use that last slot, which I think is the intended purpose, to holster the knife. You could also holster the knife here. You could holster the knife in the middle. There's nothing necessarily to say. I can't convince you guys to have the knife on the end. You can also then take the knife too, And another place that I've noticed here on the back, just to take this and rotate this around, there's a slot here also located on the back where the quiver is. You can also take and holster the knife that way. But I think this place is actually more dedicated to the crossbow. So I think I would rather go back instead to the idea of actually holstering the knife here on the front. Put the figure down here for 1 second. The figure also, like I said, comes included with the crossbow. The crossbow is going to be my go-to thing when it comes to displaying the figure. I mean, you can't have Van Helsing without a crossbow. The crossbow does have a string. Now, the string does, you can pull it, but not pull it too far back. If you pull it all the way back where it's supposed to latch onto this, I think, honestly, it's going to break the plastic. If you see how far I'm actually already pulling it, and I'm only 2/3 of the way up, yeah, you can probably see. I don't think it's a good idea to pull it all the way back. I think it's going to get too taut, and either the string is going to break and give way, where you can see right there, or I think it's probably going to just snap on the ends of these. For all intents and purposes, I think the idea is that you're supposed to pull this back all the way, but again, I just don't feel comfortable the idea of always having it drawn back like this. Once it's far enough back, and you can already see how loose it's developed on the string there, once it's far enough back for all intents and purposes, you can then take yourself an arrow, and you can holster the arrow in there. Now again, it's entirely up to you if you guys want to do this. I don't feel too comfortable with the idea of pulling the string all the way back, because I think that's going to break. But you could then take your arrow and holster that in there. So that's a nice little thing that they could be able to do. This obviously does fit in also into his hands. With the hands with Splinter right now in his forearms, they're just relaxed hands. But the figure also does come included with a specific trigger firing hand where we can holster, or in this case, have him holding the crossbow. And the figure, you can see, lines up perfectly to the trigger. As I did mention earlier, though, what you can do, too, is located here on the back. Now, this would be a place that would hold all the arrows. There really isn't enough space to hold the arrows and hold the crossbow. The crossbow could, for all intents and purposes, fit in there. But I think also what I would do is take the crossbow and take the part of the bow and actually fit it in there and wedge it into that loop. And if you have it far enough in there, you can holster then. I keep saying holster. You can actually have the crossbow then attached on the back of the quiver, which I think is the way it was supposed to be designed for. Let's go ahead and just remove that for right now. By the way, the quiver does attach. There's a peg located on the back of it. It does plug into the back of Splinter's body. So if you are worried that the bandolier is going to sit a little loose, there's at least a place that can sort of keep it in place. Also, too, while we have the figure back down here for a second, let's just straighten out his feet. The figure then comes with a series of interchangeable arrows. I say interchangeable again if you're going to be planning to use them with the crossbow. I am not, but you have like 3 of these arrows that certainly just look like they're carved out sticks. You can see there's the feathers on the end of it. These would be the best, I would imagine, if anything, to fit into the crossbow. Then there's this one that has a more kind of like cutting blade, I suppose. I mean, if you were to compare really the two. The arrows themselves look very similar, but then the blade on the end is very much different. So again, I would imagine, let's just get that to focus in there. I would imagine this is probably ideal for cutting rope or cutting vampires, whatever approaches them, I suppose, first. I would also think, by the way, that there's a little, I guess, hinge in the middle there. I would imagine for the practical use of this arrow that this probably would fan out further than what it is right now. Kind of also looks a little like a bat wing. My favorite thing of the arrows is this one right here. I don't know how effective this would be depending on whether you believe in certain lore of vampires, but the idea of garlic was always the thing that always deterred vampires from coming near you. It would also probably prevent a lot of your friends from coming near you as well. But you get, in this case, 3 bunches. I don't think it's a clove. I think the cloves are inside the bunches, but you get 3 garlics, and those are fed onto the end of the arrow. All of those arrows, by the way, again, we're going to flip the figure around, can be fit. I was going to say holstered. You can fit them then in the back here. And even though there is a lot of arrows to work with, you can still successfully attach all 3 of them. Did I just drop one? I think I may have just dropped one. They all fit inside the quiver there. Let's go ahead and remove this right now. Take a quick tally count. Yeah, I think I'm missing the one with the blade. Oh, I see where it is. It's down on the floor. Of course it's down on the floor. So let's put the figure down here again, and then again quickly we'll look through the hands. So he comes with a gripping hand for holding the stake. Got that. He comes with this hand that looks like he wants to curse somebody. Curse potentially a vampire. He comes with also a pointing hand along those same ideas. And then the figure also comes included with, again, another gripping hand. So there's lots to work with here. The last thing that Splinter comes included with is the head sculpt that doesn't have a hat. Now I'm thinking to myself, while I do like the idea of displaying him with the hat, what am I then going to do with this head? I do have extra splinters though, so I might just pop the head off the other splinter that I already have. I think I have 2 other splinters, and I might put reading glasses Splinter head on there instead. So it looks like he's reading a book. Splinter's getting a little older in age, of course, so he's obviously going to want to need himself some spectacles, some glasses in order to read whatever he's reading. So I might end up just very well using this head sculpt with another Splinter figure. It seems to be the same head as the other Splinter we looked at before. I should have really brought in one of the movie Splinters for comparisons, but it looks like it's exactly the same head, just only by the fact it's got different glasses here on the front. The glasses, I guess you could remove, but why would you remove them? They look fantastic on Splinter. You can then pop the existing head off. Let's just remove first the knife. Remove all the 3 stakes. Stake, stake, stake. And again, like he has this head sculpt and he has this one right here, which to look at them, they look very much identical to one another. Obviously, one has the hat, one does not have the hat, but I think all the rest of the molding and the paint is exactly the same. To change out the head, even though I'm going to be going back to this one, you just easily pop that off the ball joint, pop then the new head back in place. And it kind of, really, with this head sculpt in place, it kind of looks like Splinter's wearing a smoking jacket. Settled in for the night. All his boys are out fighting crime. He's just going to relax in his smoking jacket. And he's going to read himself some literature. Let's go ahead, though, and pop that off. Put back in what I feel to be the better of the 2 heads. And even though this one does have a hat, the hat is not removable. You can see nicely the way they've opened up the back section here to allow those ears of Splinter to stick out. A nice little touch of detail is also the fact that they put the little, kind of again, looks like a bat here on the back of his head. But the hat itself is made of a softer plastic, while the head of Splinter is more of a harder plastic, but a fantastic head sculpt either way. I think I might have even bent the glasses just a little bit here, so I'm going to have to see if I can straighten those out. It might have even very well come out of the packaging like that. You can see one side it's fine, the other side is not. And most of the time when I've been putting on the heads, I've been trying to put it on from the bottom of his head. Maybe I did put a little bit of pressure on the sides, but it's still a nice looking Splinter head nonetheless. For the rest of his outfit, he is wearing the long-tailed jacket here. The jacket itself does have a split at the back. It's made of softer plastic, so it does allow the Splinter tail to stick out. The Splinter tail, once again, is a wireframe, so you can bend and move that if you want. The bandolier also, if you're wondering too, because it's only attached just by that peg, you could really then slide it off his body if you wanted to have it off completely. I think it brings a little extra charm. It certainly gives him the available option then to carry around the stuff that he needs to battle vampires with. But yeah, like I said, it just plugs into the back of his body. The jacket looks nice, though. It's kind of more of a reddish-brown color. It kind of looks very much replicates the coloring and the look of leather. He has a fur collar here, and just below that, he actually still manages to have Splinter's rags. Although in the rags, the other Splinter we looked at before, they used fabric. This, they've actually just replicated instead using plastic. And of course, underneath that is Splinter's legs. I think what they would have used carryover from the original Splinter from the movie line would have been, of course, the head, not the hands, the lower legs, and not this part, because again, this would have been fabric. So there are some reused of molds here, but really not as much as you would think. For the articulation here for Splinter, his head is on a ball joint. So once again, you can rotate the head back and forth. Move it up, you can move it down, and again, you can slightly rock it back and forth. Arms do comfortably come out at 90 degrees, although it's a little tighter on these arms. You can also take the arms and, of course, move them forward. You can move them back. The figure also does possess a double hinge in the elbow. One right there, one right there, so you can bend the arm. Again, a little tighter on this figure, but again, I would much rather tighter joints than super loose joints. Hands rotate all the way around. You can hinge them also back and forth. The figure does also have, if I can get underneath there, an actual waist swivel, or it could also be a ball joint. This jacket is made of a very soft plastic. It certainly helps to move the joint underneath all that. The legs do split out. Once again, seem to be relying on ball joints. You can take those legs and move them forward, move them back. Figure has a single bend in the knee, but it allows the lower leg at least to rotate. And you also have ankle articulation. A couple of my Splinters have started to develop loose ankles. I think, in fact, one of them, when I just immediately taking it out of the box, already started to have loose ankles. But the ankles on this Splinter seem to be okay so far. One also thing, too, I can also mention is the figure does have toe articulation. And while we're certainly on the topic of toes, the figure does have pegals on the undersides of his feet. I know we already talked about that. So you can use yourself a display stand. Because the wireframe tail, though, does have a wireframe, at least it does serve as sort of a stabilizing third leg for a tripod. So really, you don't need the display stand, even though it's technically included. Because they are using the same feet as Splinter, even though I'm not going to tend to use this display stand with now Splinter, we're looking at the Van Helsing version, I think I'm probably rather going to use that display stand with the movie Splinter, as I have a couple of them, unfortunately, that have developed loose ankles. For those that were worried about the whereabouts of that one arrow I dropped in the review, I know you guys were very well aware of when I dropped stuff onto the floor. It has been retrieved. It has gone back to the home with the rest of all the other arrows in the back of his quiver. It's there right now. I don't know if you guys can count how many arrows are on the back of his body. And that's the thing I really like. The one point I did want to point out on Van Helsing's Splinter is the fact that NECA found a place to store every single thing that comes included with this figure. You don't have to put anything really in his hands. I have right now, granted, his crossbow and one stake. But if you wanted to have the figure without anything in his hands, he has the means to house everything. Well, except for, of course, his interchangeable head. And technically some of his swapped out hands. Other than that, though, yeah, all of his weapons do fit nicely onto the figure, and I like when you can do that without having to put anything back in the box. When it comes to certainly the storage of the crossbow, if it's not going to be in his hand, you can holster on the back of his body in that quiver section. The thing about the crossbow, though, is while there is what seems to be the means to pull back, draw back the string that's on the crossbow and slot it in that groove that's at the back of it, I didn't personally want to do that. It does look like with a little bit of tugging, you could get that string all the way back. But I would worry, at least, especially if you're going to have that displayed with the figure for a long period of time, that wouldn't give way eventually, and those strings that are attached to the side of the crossbow would eventually not snap. I decided to leave it off. I did want to point out, though, that it does look like you can pull it back all the way. I didn't want to do that, though. What I did want to certainly do, though, is display this guy with the hat, because I think it's the best of the two looks. Don't worry, though, as I did mention in this review, that other head is going to come rather in handy, because I do have two Splinters, after all. One Splinter is going to look au naturel. The other Splinter, though, is going to be sitting down after a long day of teaching his student sons that don't seem to ever want to listen to what he's going to be saying anyways, but after a long day, he sits down with a hot cocoa. Splinter likes hot cocoa, and he's going to be putting on his reading glasses and read one of his favorite books. I like the idea that they included that head. So yeah, while I'm not going to be using that head specifically with this version of Splinter, that head, you'll be happy to know, will be used with one of my other Splinter figures in my collection. What do you guys, though, think of Van Helsing's Splinter? Let me know down below in the comments section. Isn't that a pretty neat looking figure? It seems to follow the same suit as the April O'Neil, where in both those cases we're taking actually movie tied in characters and we're making them into the monster characters that we're getting from Universal Monsters. On the other hand, though, when it came to the actual Turtle brothers, you could use the argument that they still sort of look like their movie counterparts. But because so much have been drastically changed on the figures' bodies, they look less like the movie characters than what we get here with Splinter and what we got before with April O'Neil. Either way, though, a really nice looking Van Helsing Splinter. Again, let me know what you guys think of the figure down below in the comment section. And of the figures we've looked at so far of the Universal Monsters, which one would you say is your top 3 favorites? Also, as well, I'd like to thank the folks over at NECA Toys that did come through and did provide this sample of the brand new Van Helsing Splinter that we could have a look at in this review. If you guys certainly enjoyed this video, why not throw it a like? If you guys are enjoying the content, on the other hand, and certainly on board to see more, then make sure you're hitting the subscribe button down below and that you're also turning on the bell notification. Doing those two things ensures that you're going to get those reminders every single time a new video posts. You have been probably noticing lately here on this channel that we've been doing a lot of NECA reviews. Well, you'll be also happy to know that we're going to be doing a lot more NECA reviews, as there's going to be a lot more in the pipeline. So making sure that, of course, as always, that you're coming back on a regular basis. And as always, guys, thanks for watching. See you guys next time.